Hello everyone. Thanks for joining us today for the New Blue FX ColorFast Color Reinvented webinar. My name is Adam Dolan and I'll be your moderator today. You can follow other attendees and share with your followers on Twitter by using the hashtag NBFXColor and handle @NewBlueFX. If you have any questions or comments during the presentation, use the question and answer panel on the right side of your GoToWebinar player to share at any time during the webinar. We'll pause briefly at the end of each section to answer a few questions of yours, and then we'll do our best at the end of the presentation to get to all the questions. At this point, I want to introduce our VP of Products, Travis White. Travis has more than 15 years of experience in video and 3D applications. He's developed more than 30 products and worked as a Hollywood editor. Today, he's going to show you how ColorFast will reinvent the way you see color. Travis, welcome.
Thanks, Adam. Hello, everyone. How you doing? And the next thing that we're going to do is look at what we're going to learn inside this webinar. So these are the things that we're going to be covering. First, the notion of primary and secondary selections and corrections within the same product, New Blue ColorFast. And we'll look at what the different controls are in each section and how to work with them. Next thing, we're going to be looking at the reinvented luminance. Why we say reinvented is some of you who have been dealing with color correction are familiar with luminance curves, for which you had your high, mid, and shadow ranges all resting on one curve. You've often experienced bringing up the highs only to see the mids follow, and you might not necessarily want that. So we're approaching it differently, and we'll show you how that is. Next, we're going to look at a mask that we call skin preservation. It's a color mask that enables you to keep your primary corrections. Often your primary corrections are getting good white balance and good skin tone and all that. How to keep your skin true while you're doing some more extreme grades in the secondary correction area. Next, we're going to look at color masking with shapes. And finally, isolated color corrections on specific clips, as well as applying a grade across multiple clips in a sequence. So those are the things we're going to be covering, and I guess right now we'll just get on to it. So let me bring up my Avid Media Composer, and we have this clip of this girl walking through a street, as well as we have this clip of looking up to these skyscrapers, and this is kind of a short little story that we'll tell. Where this girl is walking down the street here, and then we cut to her actually walking. And we'll use these two clips to illustrate some of the fundamentals that you have with New Blue ColorFast. So the first thing I'm going to do is go up to my effects palette, and in the effects palette you have New Blue ColorFast right here. And instead of applying this effect to the clip event itself on the timeline, I'm actually going to apply it to a slice above that clip. I'm going to work with it that way. The reason being is that we have this opportunity to shy one track to the next and see what we're going to be doing with these different tracks. So I want to open up my effects panel, and you can see now we're going to work with ColorFast on this given clip. So the first thing we want to do is walk through our primary corrections. So let me close up the secondary corrections just so you can see what we have here in our primary. So we're working on this given track right here, V2. And first thing we want to do is do a white pick. So this particular clip, it looks pretty close to good, although it does have a little bit of haze to it, and it doesn't have as rich of colors as we might intend. In fact, we're going to go for a very blue look on this clip and the next. So we'll do it that way. So the first thing you want to do is grab something you think should be white or gray or not have any particular color bias, and release that picker, and then you'll get that effect. Let me turn on my V2 track so we can really see what's happening there. Now there's not that much of a color change. Notice this slider called correction. This is the amount of white pick or white balance that's being applied. 100% obviously is the full thing. Now we put this in because you might have shot intentionally warm or intentionally cool, and so now you have that ability. If we do a full white balance, sometimes it's not exactly what you want, so you can dial that back. If we dial it down to 0, you'll see there's a little bit of a pinkish hue in the sky, and if we bring it up to 100%, that hue's pretty much dealt with. The next thing we want to look at is just our saturation. So it's pretty straightforward. You could dial it up for full saturation, dial it down for full black and white. And so we could do something to pump up the colors just a little bit, maybe a 20 or so. The next control we have here is called exposure. Now this is the luminance curve completely lifted or completely dropped. In fact, I'm going to use a different effect and put it on a different track. I have this effect that we have to show you scopes actually. This effect is called Region Scope. It's from our collection of Video Essentials 7. And what we're going to do is we're going to use this track to just kind of give us a scope right here as we're editing. Of course, you can use these plugins in conjunction with the color correction mode in Avid Media Composer, but we're going to use this scope for now. So we're going to open up our effects palette again, and we'll start working with our exposure. Notice as I rise the exposure, the whole waveform increases, and as I drop exposure, the whole waveform falls. So it really doesn't change the curve of what's happening here, but you can get a pretty good idea of what's going on. So let's bring it down about there. Now things are quite dark, so once I get my black levels down to where I want them, I want to extend my brights. So that is the brightness slider. Now when I bring this brightness slider up, you'll notice that the waveform actually extends upward even though my shadows or my darks don't even move. So let me bring up that brightness there and draw that up. And there you go. You have a little bit of brightness. We could extend that to maybe, let's do like a 25 or so. And we could do maybe 26 or something like that. Let's see. That's probably a good look right there. So let's go ahead and work on film gamma. What film gamma is actually, if I go ahead and turn that region on again, film gamma is a kind of contrast, and you'll notice it's going to extend the center of our waveform out. So the tops will, or the highlights will crush a little bit, the bottom will crush a little bit, and the center of that luminance range will really open up. And so I'll bring up the film gamma. It's kind of like an S-curve of sorts. It gets a really nice look here. So let's do something like maybe something like a 50 or so. So it really gives a nice contrasty kind of look. So there we have our primary correction. Very straightforward, very simple, and many times that's all you need for a lot of work that you're doing. But the next step we're going to do is we're going to go into our high, mids, and shadows and show you how those tools look. So I'm going to close up the primary correction, and now I'm going to go into secondary correction. Now there's a couple areas in here. One is highs, mids, and shadows, and the next area in the secondary correction is masks. Masks, which we'll get to a little bit later, but I just want to introduce to you what they are. We have that skin preservation mask, also a color mask, and we also have a shape mask, which is a 4-point shape that you can have in all different kinds of shapes where you can see. We're going to close that up for a moment, and we're going to go into the high, mids, and shadows. Now, in the high, mids, and shadows, we have 4 distinct groups of controls. We have a luminance range. We have the highlights, midtones, and shadows. Let's just inspect the highlights for a moment and you see what the controls are. So the first thing we have is a color pick. Interestingly enough, we are not presenting wheels in this case. And this is another approach that we've taken quite differently in the pursuit of making your work faster. If you work on consoles and you have kind of those wheels that you're working with color correction, I mean, the color wheel is a perfect idiom. It makes a lot of sense. But we've run into enough storytellers, enough editors, that sometimes they have to think twice about what color do I need to run away from on the color wheel and to get the result I need. And in this case, doing a direct color pick is more of a one-to-one relationship about how you think about the image. For example, if you think the image is too warm, well, pick a color that's warm, like this orange, and dial it out. If you think the image is not blue enough, pick blue and dial it in. So it's very much a one-to-one relationship of how you think about the picture. Another thing, then we have saturation in that whole range and level in that whole range. So what is this range? Well, let's close up the highlights for a moment and let's inspect the luminance ranges. Now, this is often not a control you have in many tools, but here you do. You can actually decide what is your highlight range, what is your midtone range, and what is your shadow range. In fact, to help us out with that, we are going to inspect. We can go into the Show Mask and inspect what are our highlights. So for the moment, I'm going to take out Blend and Spread. We'll talk about those in a second. And you can see right here we have this highlight threshold. This is the threshold or the border between where highs become mids. And you can see what is red right now is designated as our highs. So if I brought the highlight threshold up to 100, I'm essentially saying I don't have any highlights. Well, that's not true. That's not how I want to work. So let me bring that down and fill in just until this is about eating into the buildings, let's say, because I want to do a different kind of correction on the buildings than I do on the sky. Next, we could drop down and inspect where are our shadows. So our shadows are at the bottom of these buildings all around. They're a little too broad of an area. I want to reduce that area. So I can go to my shadow threshold. Again, if I bring the shadow threshold down to 0, I'm essentially saying I don't have any shadows. Well, I don't want that. Let me bring that up until I get just the amount of area that I want to control in a separate region. Now, going back to the previous comments I made about luminance curves, you're not seeing any luminance curves here. What we're doing is we're actually breaking out your highs, your mids, your shadows into distinct masks, which you can manipulate independently. In fact, if we go back to our highlights inspection, you'll see this very hard demarcation between what we're calling highlight and what we're calling midtone. Let's go look at our midtone here. So here's our midtone region that we're going to be working with. Now, in the end, no image is going to look good with this hard demarcation. So we have two different controls to crossfade or to blend your high mids and your shadows together according to your taste or what you're going for. So blend, we'll slide that slider up, and that is a crossfade of sorts. So it just gently crossfades your high mids and your shadows. Now, at times that's exactly what you want. At other times, it limits some contrast coming into certain regions, would potentially mellow out your image. You can think of details nothing but micro contrasts. So if you're limiting like how many mids get into that highlight region, you are essentially mellowing out those contrasts, and the result is less detail or shallower detail, I should say. So instead of blend, we also have this thing called spread. And this is the blurring of the edge of the mask, which brings the three regions together. So you can start to imagine you can get very different looks by using some combination of blend and spread. We will, right here, we'll go up to our luminance, and we'll just bring a blend of 25 in. Let's do that. And we'll get out of this inspection mode. Let's go back to none for our show mask. And we'll start manipulating the different regions and see what this looks like. So first off, let's go into our highlights. Highlight tints, we already talked about we want this image to be very blue. I'm not going to change the default color of orange here because this default color of orange is really kind of warming or cooling this image. So I'm going to take out orange and end up cooling this image. We go very extreme. It's really affecting our sky because this is our highlight region. Let's do something around 40 or so. And we also want to bring up some levels. Let's say we want a nice bright sky in contrast to the buildings. So I can increase my level or my luminance of this particular area. In fact, I'm just going to crank that all the way up. And now you can disable or enable this particular section of highlights, and you can see what just your highlight correction has done to your image. So that's a very good way to inspect your work and see what the differences are. Let's move on to the midtones. Now the midtones, we have the identical set of controls once again, but it's for that middle region that we've defined. Something to note, the luminance range controls, the defaults are great for the majority of images. I just opened it up to really just show you the kind of control you have so you can understand what's going on. So the midtones, again, we want to take out orange so we can cool off this image. And now if we go very extreme, you can see you get very blue buildings. We don't want to go that far, maybe something like a negative 25 or 26. And as you know, we could bring up the saturation, actually the saturation just a little bit. Let's do the saturation slider. Now this isn't saturation of just orange. This is saturation of every color within this mid-tone luminance range. So we're going to bring that up to something maybe like 25, so we're really punching this image. And then lastly, the level, we want to knock that down a bit because, as you know, a lower luminance of a certain color, or a darker color, tends to look richer. So we're going to bring down the level just a little bit, maybe something like a -10. And again, we can enable and disable. In fact, I can go down to my timeline and just shy away that V2, what has our correction on it. And you can see this is before. This is what the image looked like before, and now after ColorFast, this is what it looks like now. So let's get into our lows finally. Let's open up our shadows, and all I really want to do is really bring down the level so I get a nice crush around. So let me bring down the level to, let's say, put on 40, 45 or something like that. So we get a very rich range here. So there you can see how the highs, the mids, and the shadows all operate. In fact, if we go back to that luminance range, I was telling you can get different looks by using different kinds of blend and spread. Let's use spread instead. And now we have kind of this ethereal bloom happening around where the sky meets the skyscrapers. And that could be, maybe it looks like a little overcast day or a little bit of a dreamy scape. And you can do, different combinations of the two and really dial in a lot of different details or reduce details accordingly to have more of a soft image. So not only is it color correction, but it's also, creating a timbre of your contrasts to really help out. So again, this is where we were, and this is where we've ended up.